Welcome back to the channel and thank you for watching. Many of you have asked me to do a series on Julian Assange to give you some analysis, some breakdowns, some views, some legal explanation in simple terms so that you can all understand what's going on and have a fruitful discussion. So where do we start? So perhaps start with those that might not know who Julian Assange is and why the case is so important. You will probably have heard his name in the news. You've probably heard his name from other people and may not know who he is and what the importance is. In a nutshell, Julian Assange was the founder of WikiLeaks, a website a bit like Wikipedia, but dedicated to publishing news and other classified articles, news leaks, classified documents that have been leaked, and so on. Some of those, naturally, some governments have been upset about and have sought to prosecute him under various legislation. But I'll come back to that in a little moment. The argument essentially is a balance between the right to the freedom of expression and freedom of press and so on, which is guaranteed in various different jurisdictions. The First Amendment in the United States guaranteeing free press and freedom of speech, and Article 10 for ECHR, which guarantees the freedom of expression and the right to the freedom of expression and so on in Europe and, of course, in the United Kingdom, as against a nation's right to protect its secrets, its international security, and so on. So the bottom line is Julian Assange faces 18 federal charges against him in the United States, 17 of which were added by a grand jury for espionage. If found guilty of all 18 charges, this could result in a prison sentence of up to 175 years, clearly to spend the rest of his life in prison. Of course, I'll be going into much more detail of the full history and chronology and so on. This is just an introductory video to see how many people are interested in me doing this series. And for those of you that are interested in the most up-to-date reports, the Home Secretary of the United Kingdom has recently approved the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States. However, it's also been reported that Julian Assange has mounted an appeal against the High Court decision to allow the extradition, which is one of the judgments that I'll be going through in some detail. And interestingly, German MPs have demanded the release of Julian Assange, where it's reported that dozens of members of the German Federal Parliament have issued a statement demanding the release of Julian Assange, essentially saying that journalists must not be persecuted or punished for their work anywhere in the world. In an open letter, they write, "In the interests of press freedom, as well as for humanitarian reasons, in view of his poor state of health, Julian Assange must be released without delay." It's worth bearing in mind that Assange has been imprisoned in the United Kingdom since 2019, but has been isolated for a lot longer than that. WikiLeaks was founded in 2006, but came to international attention in 2009 and 2010 when WikiLeaks published a series of documents by a US Army intelligence officer. These documents, including videos, allege certain war crimes against the United States. After these leaks in 2010, the US government launched a criminal investigation into WikiLeaks itself and, of course, Julian Assange. Also in 2010, Sweden issued an international arrest warrant for Assange, but this was later dropped. But before those allegations were dropped, Julian Assange lost his battle for extradition to Sweden, but breached his bail in the UK and took refuge in the Embassy for Ecuador in London. He was granted asylum on the basis of political persecution. It wasn't until 2019 that Sweden dropped this investigation, saying that the case had weakened due to the amount of time that had passed in between. Also in 2019, however, Assange had disputes with the Ecuadorian authorities and his asylum was withdrawn. The embassy literally invited police into the embassy to arrest Assange, which they did, where he was then found guilty of breaching the Bail Act and sentenced to 50 weeks in prison in the UK, where he remains. Skipping forward to 2021, a UK district judge ruled against the United States' request to extradite Assange, saying that it would be oppressive given his mental health and his risk of suicide. Later in 2021, however, the UK High Court ruled that Assange could be extradited to the US to face these charges, and this is the judgment that he's currently appealing. In that judgment, the background to the case is described by the High Court at paragraph 3, saying that the summary provided by the USA is as follows: his complicity in illegal acts to obtain or receive voluminous databases of classified information, his agreement and attempt to obtain classified information through computer hacking, and his publishing certain classified documents that contained the unredacted names of innocent people who risked their safety and freedom to provide information to the United States and its allies, including local Afghans and Iraqis, journalists, religious leaders, human rights advocates, and political dissidents from repressive regimes. And starting, as I often do, with the conclusion of this judgment, and then in later videos go on to explain various parts of the judgment, this essentially says that the grounds 1, 3, and 4 have been rejected, all of which I will explain later, but allowed on ground 2 and 5, but accordingly quashed the order discharging Assange and remitted the case back to Westminster Magistrates Court, with the direction to proceed as the district judge would have been required to do if she decided differently the relevant question as to whether his mental health condition was such that it would be oppressive to extradite him, namely by sending the case to the Secretary of State. And finally, the court remanded Assange into custody. And just as a very brief overview to this introduction to this High Court case, essentially the USA appealed against the order discharging Assange on 5 separate grounds. The first ground being that the judge made errors of law in the application of the test under Section 91. Under ground 2, having decided the threshold for discharge under that section was met, the judge ought to have notified the USA of the provisional view to afford it the opportunity of offering assurances to the court. Assurances essentially would go against the finding of the judge, which will be important later for my detailed discussion. Ground 3, having concluded that the principal psychiatric expert called on behalf of the defense had misled her on a material issue, the judge ought to have ruled that his evidence was incapable of being relied upon. Ground 4, the judge erred in her overall assessment of the evidence going to the risk of suicide. And ground 5, the USA has now provided the UK with a package of assurances which are responsive to the judge's specific findings in the case. In particular, assurances that Assange will not be subjected to SAMS or imprisoned at ADX unless he were to do something subsequent to the offering of assurances, all of which I will explain in another video. SAMS essentially measures and ADX essentially being sort of a maximum security prison. But some lawyers have been quoted to describe SAMS, these special administrative measures, to dehumanize defendants and create a situation where they cannot exist in a defiant posture to fight the case. So essentially, it's the US saying that they will provide assurances that this is not going to happen if Assange is extradited to face those charges. So there is but the briefest of overviews and introduction to this series of videos for those that might be interested, and for those that didn't know anything about Julian Assange, although you've probably heard his name quite a lot in the media. And for those that are interested in an in-depth discussion about all of these issues, freedom of speech and so on, I look forward to doing this series of videos, so please do like this video, subscribe, hit the bell, hit me up in the comments to tell me which aspects you want me to talk about, which aspects you are most interested in, and I hope you enjoyed this introductory video, and as always, thank you for watching.